Hello everybody! It has been a hot minute since I did a tag video and I thought, why not today? This seems like a good idea. So I'm going to do the DNF tag. This was originally created by Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and I will link the original video down below if you want to check that out. I wasn't tagged to do this, I just saw other people doing it and thought I should do that because I do DNF but I rarely talk about it, so this is a pretty interesting thing that I don't usually discuss, I guess. So let's get into the questions. So question one, of course, is do you DNF? And I do, but rarely, and I rarely talk about the books that I DNF. And the infrequency of my DNFing is mostly because I think DNFing for me is a very conscious decision that I make after I have at first intended to actually finish a book, if that makes sense. Like, if I go to the library and pick a book off the shelf and I read 2 pages of it and decide it's not for me because I don't like the character's voice or whatever, that's not a DNF. I bring a lot of books home from the library that I flip through and kind of try, but then just never really start reading them. So a DNF is something that I read like 25% of the book, I gave it a really good shot, and then had to very consciously decide to put it down. And that's probably why it's still pretty difficult for me to do and why I do it so rarely. I will often find reasons to push through a book, whether that's a good thing or not. Question number 2 is, if you DNF a book, does it count towards books read for the month? No, I don't count DNFs at all towards any of my reading statistics, and I don't rate them, and like I said, I rarely talk about them, so they just disappear into the ether. Question number 3, is there a difference between a DNF and just putting it down for a bit? Absolutely. Like I said, DNFing is a very conscious thing for me where I tell myself I am letting go of this thing and I am probably not going to come back to it. I pause as well as start and stop books all the time, and it's very much a case of I wasn't in the right mood for it or didn't have time for it. Pausing a book is also often a circumstantial thing for me, like outside of my control. I'm reading a library book and I have to send it back to the library because somebody else has a hold on it, so it just goes back on the TBR until I can get the book again. But once again, DNFing is a very conscious thing for me, and usually when I DNF a book, I know I'm not going to come back to it again. Next, what popular book have you DNF'd? I'm not sure what popular book means in this context, like hyped on BookTube or international bestseller or very well known in the SFF community, like all of the above. I've DNF'd things from all of these categories, like Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I actually really tried to read The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt years ago, and that was not for me. And then I've also DNF'd like Hugo and Nebula Award winners. I DNF'd The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi, which is well known and quite critically acclaimed. I also DNF'd more than one Clark Award winner for incest themes that I just couldn't handle. Question number 5, what book do you wish you had DNF'd? I know exactly what this book is. Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. I've spoken about this before, but I have a complicated relationship with Mieville's books. I either hate them or love them. And Perdido Street Station was the first book I ever read by Mieville, and that is literally the book that broke me of the habit of finishing every single book that I started, because prior to that I never DNF'd anything. I didn't have the concept of DNFing, but I hated reading Perdido Street Station so much that I swore to myself that if I finished that huge book that just absolutely was not my type of thing, that I would let myself DNF anything in the future. So on the one hand, it kind of did something good for me because learning the importance of letting go of a book that is not working for you, that was something I did need to learn. But the experience of reading that book was pretty awful, and not because it was a terrible book, but because it like provoked this almost allergic brain reaction in me. So I should have DNF'd it at the time. Question number 6 is, do you ever reattempt to read a DNF, and has this ever been successful for you? Yes and yes, but in most cases I end up like DNFing the thing a second time, but it has happened successfully. I do DNF some things which are more like long-term pauses, and Embassy Town by China Miéville is a really good example of this. When I first tried to read that book, I did pretty much hard DNF it because it wasn't the right book at the right time, and obviously I learned my lesson with Perdido Street Station. But I came back to it like 4 or 5 years later, and I was at that point probably a different kind of reader and more experienced with hard science fiction. And then Embassy Town turned out to be one of like my favorite SF novels about linguistics and alien communication ever. So it was absolutely worth coming back to. And I'm glad that I DNF'd it the first time, because if I had forced myself to read it at that point, I probably would have hated it. So there are successful things like that, but then there are things like I've reattempted a couple of the DNFs from my Hugo project, like the Terminal Experiment by Robert Sawyer. I've tried to read that twice now, and I've angry DNF'd it twice. And then Rainbow's End by Werner Vinge was another Hugo winner that I decided to reattempt, because I think I had originally DNF'd it because it was just kind of boring. And I did finish it the second time around, but it was mediocre. Like, it probably wasn't worth investing the time and trying it again, but it also wasn't like terrible. Question number 7, what do you do with books you DNF? I'm not sure if this is like, what do you do physically with books you DNF? Like I said before, I don't rate them on Goodreads or anything, and I don't really review them or talk about them unless they were from like a TBR or a reading project or something where I have a reason to come back and mention the thing again. And if it's something that I own, like, I get rid of it immediately. That's my policy now, is if I DNF a book that I own, I get rid of it immediately. Also, if I finish a book that I own that I really didn't like, I also get rid of it immediately. And, you know, if I really did make an attempt to read the book, I'll probably shelve it as did not finish on Goodreads and then never think about it again. And the last question is, do you choose more or less risky titles because of your stance on DNFing? I think this is a really interesting question. I'm like, no, I don't. I don't think that DNFing affects what I pick up to try in the first place, but it has had a real effect on my mindset towards my own book collection and my book buying habits. So I kind of approach this from the opposite end here, like not what I'm trying, but what I'm getting rid of. And that's been really, really important for me. Learning to DNF was pretty much my first step in learning how to let go of books and realize that there are books out there that are not worth investing my time and my emotions in, and that's okay. And it was also the first step in acknowledging that I can get rid of books, because for a long time I wanted to have a really big book collection and I would keep everything, even things I couldn't get myself to read or that I had hated. So yeah, I think DNFing is it's a really healthy mindset that can help you have a better relationship with the books that you do own and that you want to read. But coming back to the original question, if it affects what I pick up to read in the first place, no. And that's probably because, like I said before, I've always had this habit of like trying a lot of things, but I don't consider myself to have started reading them unless I've gotten a long ways into them. So just flipping through things and seeing if I might like it, that's sort of my winnowing process for the more risky reading choices and whether I want to try them or not. So it's an interesting thing, I guess. I'm probably making this more complicated than it really is, but explaining what goes on inside my head when I'm trying to decide what to read is kind of complicated. That is it for this tag. I'm not going to directly tag anybody because I'm not sure who has done this before or who might want to, but if you want to, please consider yourself to be tagged by me. Let me know what you thought about this topic. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.